welcome everybody to GameCast Continuum. We are your hosts, DC Skater Shane, and
Mr. Bojangles, 1984.
on this week's episode, we'll be discussing Earthbound. But before we do
Earthbound.
that,
Sorry.
that's fine. But before we get into that, we'll take care of a little bit of housekeeping. Be sure to check our Twitter page to follow us for updates and everything like that over at GC Continuum. And if you're listening to this on Podbean or iTunes and would like to see the video version, you can check us out live at twitch.tv/GamecastContinuum, as well as on YouTube. Again, search for Gamecast Continuum. Now that we got some of that out of the way, let's dive right in. This week, through our generator, we came up with Earthbound, which actually was kind of funny because the main character of the game, actually, we had previously discussed in last week's episode, talking about Super Smash Brothers. So that was a nice little... the way it kind of worked out was kind of nice.
Yeah, it was a crazy coincidence that Ness was part of Super Smash Brothers, and then we do the randomization and come out with Earthbound, which is where Ness is from.
But Earthbound itself, actually, I thought it's kind of interesting because it was actually known as Mother 2 in Japan, but it's the only game in the, I guess, Mother series to be released over here in the US, which is kind of interesting that they ported over the second game in the series as opposed to, bringing anything else over in the series.
Yeah, maybe the first game they just didn't feel got received as well over in Japan, perhaps. I mean, I'm not them, I can't pick their brain, but that's the only thing I could assume.
I mean, that could be, but I mean, when they started making the game itself, I mean, it took them a good 5 years actually to make it, and it ended up coming out in Japan on August 27th of 94, and then about a year, not quite a year later, in June of 95, it came out in the US. But yeah, it was neat because the game itself, what I found actually kind of interesting, it was written and designed by a fairly known Japanese author who's actually an author, musician, and advertiser named... hopefully I don't butcher this.
Shigesato Itoi?
Yeah, and they actually sort of banked off of, or they based part of the advertising around him, using his name basically to help promote the game a little bit more, which helped it sell in Japan, but not nearly as much kind of over here.
Yeah.
And aside from that, you had a couple other big names on this game too. You had Satoru Iwata, who ended up actually becoming the president of Nintendo and the CEO. So, I mean, granted, it has nothing to necessarily do with the game that, pushed him to that point, but it's kind of interesting to see how some people, where they start, so to speak, and then, or where they were, and then they get pushed up to a bigger title later on.
Yeah, we're going to find a lot of that, I think, as we're going through and digging into the information about these games we're covering. I'm sure we'll see some very familiar names that we're just used to as being the higher-ups, but when they first got their start, they were producing games or music for games.
True.
Yeah.
But I mean, personally, this episode was kind of exciting for me because I hadn't really gotten to play this game growing up. So going through and doing a lot of research, actually, it took a little bit more, for me, because it wasn't something that I could really pull from memory and really make it, just pulling memories that I had of the game. It was a lot more of actual research and see what the game's about. And I mean, being that it did come from Japan, obviously it's a JRPG, which at the time wasn't a big seller over here in the US, but they actually kind of give a portrayal of the Western culture and Americana in the game, which I thought was kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
You know, and sort of as we had mentioned earlier too, your main character in this was Ness, who I'm assuming he was in the other Mother games. I don't actually know. I didn't get to look into that. I don't know if you had a chance at all or if you heard anything on that.
Who, myself? No, actually, I don't know any particulars on the original Mother game, whether Ness was part of it or not. But I mean, it's good to see that Ness is pretty adaptable. You know, he goes from a JRPG into a fighting game and can hold his own. So it's pretty interesting.
I mean, and
not as interesting as using a payphone for save points, though.
well, I mean, they use that, you know, as again, they're kind of taking it's their portrayal of Americana. So I mean, you have, you know, at that time too, I think I want to say it was based of, I forget what the era was, but you know, payphones obviously were prominent, which at this point I haven't seen a payphone in God knows how long.
Yeah, it was released August 27th of 1994 in Japan, and it took 5 years to develop. So in 1989, what was their outlook on the US?
That's fair.
You know, so I mean,
but I mean, they also, you know, they added in other than the payphones, you know, as your save point, you transferred money via an ATM, and then you had, since Ness was a kid, actually, he had yo-yos as weapons. So I mean, it was kind of, everything was sort of fitting, I think, as far as that's concerned. But I mean, the game itself uses I mean, it goes as your typical RPG type game, though. I mean, whether or not it's JRPG, RPG, whatever you want to call it, you know, you still have your various attacks and so forth to help to basically whittle your opponent down until they're defeated. You gain your XP, level up your characters, things like that. But what I found interesting at the time too, you know, a lot of RPGs and even nowadays use kind of just random encounters. So as you're walking around, boom, fight comes up, you know, you battle and it goes one way or another.
Yeah.
What they did actually is there was a system that actually revolved around physical contact between characters. So you actually had to walk up to an enemy and bump into them, I believe it was, or something to that effect, to actually start the fight. And
just make your hitbox overlap with theirs, I would assume.
Yeah, pretty much. And what was nice about that is it actually gave a little bit deeper of a system in place, because you could actually sneak up on an enemy, attack them from, you know, the back, and actually get a like an early hit type deal, or get a little bit of an advantage on them.
Yeah, you can get like a preemptive strike like you would in like Final Fantasy, but instead of it being like Final Fantasy and that's just random, you know, at least with this game, you could set that up yourself if you approach the fight properly. As you mentioned, you come from behind the enemy, you get a sneak attack on them, and you can get a free hit before they do anything. Right. I think that's a pretty cool way to approach the combat. I was never really a fan of the random battles. You know, I get why they put them in there, so you're just not traversing the map and not doing anything. People would get bored, maybe not want to play that segment of the game or what have you, but I don't know. Being able to see the enemies on the map is good in one way, because you can set the battle up the way that you want to,
and actually avoid enemies too.
You could avoid the enemies if you wanted to altogether and just go straight from point A to B. Cut down on how long it takes you to get through the game.
Or, you know, if you realize, because I know from playing just other games, not this one in particular, but other RPGs, there are some enemies that I kind of might want to avoid just because the battles are a giant pain to deal with. So at least with
Yeah.
being able to see him, you could kind of go, well, I'm going to take the slightly longer way, avoid the target, and still get by.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, of course, if people didn't want to fight, then they don't fight. But if you don't fight, you don't level up. So, I mean, at some point, people, I think, would go into random areas to start the encounters. That way they can get the kills, get the XP, and make themselves
At least
stronger, you know?
I mean, at least you would know, too, what you're getting yourself into, you know?
Yeah.
As opposed to, I mean, what random battles, obviously, you know, being that they are completely randomized, you have no idea what you're popping up against. You know, you could come into a real low, you know, something easy that you can just blow through, or you end up with a fight that's going to take you, say, a couple minutes, you know, 5-10 minutes to do, which you might not want to do at that time.
Yeah.
But you know, diving forward a little bit in this game, being that I haven't played this game, I kind of wanted to actually look into it a little bit, look into the story, just to figure out, you know, what it was about. And
Yeah, it looks like we have a lot of information here to cover.
there's a bit of information, but you know, I tried to pick out some of the more prevalent points. You know, obviously,
Yeah.
you know, spoiler alert but anybody who hasn't played it, but this game's been out since '95, so it's past its time. But
Yeah.
you know, as we covered earlier, it starts off as, well, first off, it takes place a couple years after the events of the original Mother game. And you start off as a small child named Ness, who was looking at a meteorite crash with his neighbor and friend, Pokey, which...
Pokey.
Yeah, the names themselves, you know, as we're going to get to in a little bit, are... they're interesting, to say the least. But as they started investigating the meteor, Ness comes across a alien force named Gigas, and as you, hopefully I'm not butchering it too bad, but you know, as
Oh, I mean, that's how I probably would have said it too. I mean, Giygas, Gigas, Gigas. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll go with that. And you know, jumping forward a little bit, he actually gets instructed by a bee, which
By a bee? What the hell?
I don't really know, but he was instructed by a bee, and the bee basically tells Ness that he's got to collect a bunch of melodies to stop the alien force. Which again, I don't quite get, but you know what? It's, you know, it sounds sort of like your typical RPG, so even right from there, where you find out, all right, here's the, you know, this is the big bad, and you have to collect so many of whatever it may be in order to finally defeat him. Yeah, and you know, again, as you start progressing through the story and everything, you get your little party of characters, which in this case, you get it's 3 children that you end up getting
So
teamed in.
you and Nessa's friends, and you go throughout the world and fuck shit
basically,
up. Okay.
more or less. You know, you're going around trying to collect the various songs, I guess, in order to defeat the alien force. But yeah, you get 3 kids as part of your party named Paula, Jeff, and Pooh.
Pooh. Paula, Jeff, and his boy Pooh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Who actually, you know, I don't know. That's when I read that, I actually had to reread it because it kind of threw me off. But the funny thing is, Pooh is actually a female who's a psychic, an eccentric inventor. Well, actually, the 3 different characters are, you have a psychic girl, which is Paula, Jeff, who's an eccentric inventor, and the ponytailed martial artist named Pooh.
Very, very interesting.
Do what you will, you know.
Well, they sure did.
Well, they took some liberties. I'll say that.
So, In 1989, their outlook on us naming our children was we would name our child Pooh.
I guess I don't know.
It just
But
seems funny to me. Like we talk to bees and we fight alien races with yo-yos with a bunch of kids.
I mean, the yo-yos and that makes sense because of them being kids. You're not going to give them, a giant sword to beat the crap out of aliens. So the yo-yos and everything, all right, I could deal with that. But the character naming,
Um,
that's on a whole different level.
It's a JRPG. Let's just put it at that.
But and then you go through a variety of different worlds, levels, and things. You end up finding a device. Well, you end up finding the device that actually keeping the alien contained. Here's the plot twist, everybody. It's being guarded by Pokey, actually, and then he was helping Gigas all along.
Oh, so your neighbor, who you thought was your friend, has actually been working for the enemy the whole time.
Yep, he's the asshole.
What a bastard!
Pretty much. And so you discover that towards the end of the game. You fight Pokey first, again, as per most games.
Yeah.
And then after you defeat him, obviously you don't kill him, but you defeat him. He releases, Gigas after you fight him. You end up defeating him, and boom, game over.
Won the game. One interesting thing I came across while you were covering all that excellent information was during the battles themselves, you had a few different things that you could do. Some actions like attacking, of course, you could heal, spying so you can see the enemy's weakness and strengths, mirroring would emulate a specific enemy, and you could run away. You could also use special psi attacks that would require PP energy, which has been used in I know, but PP has been used in other games before.
Well, you got PP, you got Poo, whatever.
PP, Poo, just a bunch of sexual references. If your mind is in the gutter, but PP actually stands for psychic points, just so you know.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but yeah, since you do have the ability to pick your battles, as we mentioned, you have tactical advantages that you could use to your screen. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that little tidbit in there. The different actions that you had available.
I mean, they went a little bit more in depth. I mean, not necessarily more in depth than other RPGs, but they went a little bit different of a route with it. It sounds like, as opposed to just kind of taking other cues from other RPGs, they actually added a decent amount of. They added a pretty intricate system from what you're describing.
Yeah, I mean, it released in the States in '95. I mean, there are other RPGs out at that time.
True.
So maybe they just saw what they were doing and kind of went along the same lines because
they kind of just went with it.
Yeah, because the formula works. You have like an overworld, and then you have battles, whether they be random or like this game, you choose which enemies you fight. But once you're in the fights, I mean, you have to be able to attack your enemy. If there's any type of magic in the game, there has to be a section for your magical attacks, and not every game has it just there on the menu screen, like, oh, click here to heal. Most of the time, you have to go under magic, then healing magic, and then pick your healing spell. But yeah, just having that type of menu system, it just makes sense. It's pretty cut and dry for the people that are playing it, and it's easy to find what it is they're trying to do as far as the action they want to complete during their turn.
With keeping it familiar too, it makes it a lot easier for just people in general to relate to it, because since they've already played other RPGs, other JRPGs, whatever it may be, coming into a game with a similar system. Like I know I've played a couple different RPGs that had vastly different systems, and there's there really is a hell of a learning curve. So I mean, they kind of kept it similar but different, which is excellent. But I mean, that's for the most part a quick synopsis of the story. I mean, there is a lot more about the story, or a little bit more in-depth stuff as well, but we wanted to keep the show a little keep it at a decent length of time. So we didn't want to dive too far, but at least give everybody for anybody who hasn't played it, give them a quick little synopsis as to what it's about.
Yeah, I mean, we want to be informative, but we don't want to keep you guys here for like 2 hours. So
we could if you want, but
with this, we probably could.
Oh yeah, I was.
It's not like Super Smash Brothers, a fighting game, that there is some background information that you can give about some of the characters and how the game was developed, but of course, this being an RPG, there's a lot more that goes into it because there's a fully fleshed out story that we could go through, the different areas that you visit and describe, what they felt like and the concept art was, all of that.
But we just sort of scratched the surface. We may end up, depending on how well the show does, we may end up revisiting at some point and kind of just doing a little kind of fill-in episode 2, going into more characters and a little more in-depth stuff. But we wanted to keep it kind of generalized right now. But moving past story, as we had mentioned earlier too, the game is a part of it's the second entry in the Mother series. Earthbound is, but it was changed. Instead of bringing over as Mother 2, which would have really confused the hell out of people, because the first series, well, the first one wasn't released here. They changed it to Earthbound, actually, which essentially made it a little easier for people just to pick it up as a first game.
Us Westerners and our small brains.
I thought it was kind of interesting, though, with that, because
it makes sense. It's not even them trying to dig at us. I mean, you release a game that's called Mother 2, and people are going to be like, what the hell? Where the fuck's Mother 1? I've never played the first game.
No, but that's the whole thing that sort of... it's kind of confusing, is that they decided just to port the second one over, as opposed to bringing over the first one. I mean, unless the first, unless all 3 titles, which again, I don't know, but unless all 3 titles are sort of standalones in a way, that you could just bring over one or the other without having any confusion.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of games, the sequels, they're pretty much brand new games on their own, and you don't necessarily need to play the first one in order to know what's going on in the second one. Of course, it would help. You would have more backstory as far as where the characters came from, how you got to where you are, and things of that nature. But also, a lot of the times in a sequel, it would be like, this is what happened, 12 years after the events of blah, blah, blah. And then they give you a little bit of a backstory, and then they put you into the game, and you start making your own story at that point.
True. And actually, I had found, as I was doing a little bit more digging outside of story, they had to basically convert. They actually were, localizing the game too, because when we got it over from Japan, obviously the game itself was fully Japanese, and Nintendo employee Dan Osen actually started the English localization of it, but
that's going to be a tough process, man.
Well, after about 10% of the actual script, he moved on to a different project, unfortunately. But luckily, Marcus Lindblom filled the position up in 95 and took up the rest of it and really put in some work. He actually, through the process of him converting everything, his daughter was actually born, and he took off the day that she was born, and then after that, in order to get it finished, he worked 14-hour days without weekends for an entire month.
Jeez.
Which
that level of dedication.
He put in some work just in order to get it to where it needed to be. And Nintendo actually wanted the script to be quote unquote more American than a direct translation, so they kind of gave a lot of liberties to change it as he wanted it to be, to kind of make it more Americanized. Because I've seen a lot of times with translating, from watching different like anime things and things like that, when they try to just direct translate, it gets confusing.
Yeah, a lot of things can get, not to call out the movie, but like, a lot of things can get lost in translation. So
Yeah. So,
if there's
they
a
kind
joke
of,
that they make that makes sense in the Japanese English language, but doesn't really translate well in you know English, then you're gonna lose the luster and what you're trying to accomplish in that scene. So it's very smart. I think we're gonna be saying that a lot about Nintendo in their early years. Like they're very smart about giving their people the freedom to do the right thing when it's needed.
to put out the
Especially,
bet, to make the bet, to put out the best result. I mean,
yeah, so they can make sure that they put out quality product. I mean, otherwise you're just putting out a bunch of turds in the water.
but even just go, I was kind of just poking through a couple different, little facts about it too, as far as like as they were converting it. A few little things that they changed that were really noticeable was they actually removed all these logos that were copyrighted logos, like intellectual property logos. They basically took out, like, there's a Coca-Cola logo, and like Red Crosses, things like that. They actually changed them in the game, and they also removed well, they changed a couple of the cultists in the game because apparently they looked like Klansmen. So yeah, they kind of wanted to not put KKK members in their game.
I wonder why.
Gasp. And the biggest shocker that I came across that kind of made me laugh was in the original, well, in the Japanese version actually, when Ness was in his in his dream town, essentially, Magic Hand, he walked around naked, wearing a hat.
Well, am I glad they decided to give him clothes in the American version.
And yeah, the American version, they got rid of the hat, but they put on pajamas, so it's kind of a win-win for everybody. I mean, and the
I don't
funny
need
thing was,
pants. I have a hat.
he doesn't need anything, and they actually showed. They had a little screenshot on the place I was pulling some information from, and I'll be damned, he's just standing there in a nice little fun pose, just butt ass naked with a hat on.
I mean,
Which,
as far as them taking out all of the intellectual property imagery and stuff, I mean, you know how America is. I mean, people want to get paid for stuff, so I mean, they weren't getting paid for the advertisement. Why are they going to put other people's things in the game that they're shipping over to America?
right, and I mean that's fine. It made sense, but it actually took them a lot longer to do it than they initially had planned. They were actually working on.
Man, it took them 5 years to make the game.
Well,
To
not
begin
only
with,
that though.
and then they had to work on porting it over to the U.S.
Right, and here's some crazy shit. So I said the game came out. It was June, right?
I believe so. Yeah, June.
I think I said it was June.
'94, wasn't it in Japan?
No,
August. June
August of
of '95 in
'94,
the U.S. August of
U.S.
'94 in Japan.
With them doing all the, aside from porting over and doing all the porting and changing the localization in here, with doing all the changes, the game itself wasn't actually playable until May. So they basically finished it, got it out the door for June, which is insane.
Wow. That's a pretty quick turnaround.
Yeah. I mean, the graphics they didn't fix and they didn't finish up until March. So I mean, they were on a hell of a time crunch to be able to get the game, packed, shipped out to the retailers within a month, roughly, which is fairly impressive, considering that now, when the games go gold, you're looking at least at least a month or two before then they can work on, start working on bugs, start working on this, that, and the other. But this was basically, all right, it's done, let's go.
Ship it out.
Basically. But the game itself actually, and here's what I found. Another thing I kind of found interesting too. It's not, it wasn't a bad thing about the game, but critically, well, initially it didn't get a great critical praise, but because of the kind of basic graphics, and there at that time especially, RPG sales were not, it wasn't a huge draw just in general in the US. So
yeah, I mean they used a satirical marketing campaign, and like you said, there wasn't really that much interest in RPGs to begin with, so
right. I mean, what do you
can't really
expect?
that much.
I mean, at that time especially, they spent a good chunk of Nintendo put a bunch of money out for marketing. I think they did close to $2 million to market it. And you figure back in 94, 95, that's a lot of money to put out there for a game that really did not get received overly well.
Well, yeah. Yeah, 2 million just on marketing. I wonder how much it cost them to do the whole production of the game over that 5-year span.
I mean, I'd say it cost them a lot. I mean, it sold. I mean, obviously in Japan, it sold really well.
Yeah.
But in the U.S., it sold about half of what it did, which for putting out $2 billion to market it to the U.S. and everything, and to only sell around 140 or 50,000 units, not great.
No, that's not good at all. I mean, Super Smash Brothers did what? Wasn't it like 5 million?
Something like that. Well,
like 5 million copies sold.
But to be fair, though, it's Super Smash Brothers, and that's at a different time for gaming too.
Yeah. I mean, it came out a few years later in '99. People were more into gaming at the time, and it was like a newly conceived format of fighting games. So yeah, I guess it's not really a fair comparison, but
it's a hard set, But the thing is, bringing in an RPG when RPGs aren't selling too well might not have been the best idea. But
yeah, no.
They did.
One of the most interesting things is the piracy protection. I think you were just about to go over that.
Yeah. They well, I mean, at that time, obviously, with pirating games, it was, I'll say, easier than it is currently, in a way. But with doing cartridges, things like that, and what they did.
Yeah, because I mean, Nintendo used to put like this security chip in their cartridges.
Right.
So if it didn't have the chip, I mean, most of the time the games wouldn't even boot up and load.
But Earthbound decided to go a little above and beyond on that. Actually, they let you play the game if you had the pirated version, but when when the whatever was in the system or whatever it may be kind of realized it was a pirated game, it added a whole bunch more enemies than you normally would have run into, which that in itself would be kind of a pain in the ass to deal with. Instead of a couple enemies here, you get 50. Here you go. But they went one step further. Actually, they actually, right before you got to the end of the game or the end of the story and things like that, the game reset itself, and whatever you were working on, that your save file is gone. I mean, could you just imagine?
Get trolled by the game cartridges, man. Get trolled.
Pretty much. You spend, God, I mean, I know early on RPGs, you put a lot of time into them. You get to the end thinking you're about to finish the game, and boom.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. That would be devastating, especially if you put in a lot of hours to go and collect everything. You're getting prepared for the final battle, and then you go to do the final battle, and the game's like, nope, this isn't legit. Sorry.
Sorry, you're done. Try again.
Here, just stand there with your legs open. I'm going to kick you in the balls real quick.
Dude, that's a freaking steel tip boot right to the crotch. Jesus.
It's terrible. But it serves
Um,
them right. I mean, if you're gonna play a pirated version of the game and expect to get away with it, shame on you.
I mean, it's a terrible thing to do in the first place,
Yeah.
but they went above and beyond as opposed to just the game not working or whatever it may be. They said, you know what? You could play it. Spend all this time. Spend your, 30, 40 hours putting into this game. Now they're gone. Take that.
Yeah, and apparently that didn't stop the gaming community from coming around to the game either. I mean, it may not have gotten as well received as Nintendo would have hoped when the game first released, but eventually people started picking up on the game. Um, More or less because Ness was featured in Super Smash Bros. In '99, and you find out he's from the game Earthbound, and people are like, well, what's Earthbound? And so then it made people look back into the game, and then all of a sudden you have this large community just based around Earthbound. It's pretty incredible, actually, that people would go back and give the game the time of day and try to figure out the nuances of the fighting system and shit like that. But
I mean, I
evidently,
think
it had a rather large cult following that Polygon said few gaming communities are as passionate and active as Earthbound communities. So it says something. The game must be good, right?
I mean, the thing is, at that time too, you didn't really have a lot of your games didn't, as you were saying too. A lot of the communities, especially, well, you look at communities nowadays, and with everything being online, there's every game has a community. Whether or
Yep.
not it's a good one or a bad one, I can't really say. But at that time, especially, you didn't have that ability. So the fact that it got actually noted of being such a great community, that's a sight in itself. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I mean, a lot of people even said that Earthbound, after actually playing it and things, that it was a must play. And once people started playing it and seeing how great the game is, it was included in a lot of the top 50 games of all time, which is kind of surprising to me just because of how poorly it sold.
Yeah, but as we covered earlier, I mean, RPGs weren't big in the United States at that time. I mean, you give it 4 more years, and more RPGs have come out. People have actually started, giving them a chance. Then you get Super Smash Brothers, which people loved, and one of the characters is Ness. So then they go back and like, oh, what's this Earthbound? Oh, it's a Japanese role-playing game. Let me check that out. And they just go from there.
True. I mean, one other thing that I did see that was kind of interesting. Granted, they did spend a ton of time localizing it and everything for the Western audience, and a lot of different reviews on it actually noted that the conversion was fantastic for the time.
Yep.
Obviously now there's a lot more. It's a lot easier to translate games and make things
I'm telling you, man,
work.
I think it had a lot to do with him giving,
Creative control,
yeah, they
so
gave
to
him
speak.
the ability to change things as he saw fit in order to make the translations more Americanized, so it would fit in better with our culture and how we say things and stuff like that. So I think that had a big part of why the English conversion was so well received, because it
That they
wasn't just a
do this.
stuffy translation from Japanese to English.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Even well, I had started looking up too, because for being how in so many of like the top 50 games, and then I kind of looked up a couple reviews just for well-known well-known game companies that are out there that do reviews, like IGN, Game Informer, and things like that. And
Yep.
I mean, it got a 9 from IGN, an 8 out of 10 for Game Informer, and a 3.5 from GamePro, which I don't actually know if GamePro's around anymore. Um,
GamePro.
I mean, I know I used to read the magazines growing
Is
up.
that Game Informer now?
I don't know, but I know growing up I read Game Informer or Game Pro religiously. And actually, just quick side note, I went ahead and looked it up. Actually, Game Pro went away back in 2011.
There was a point in time I had like every gaming magazine.
So did I. I had actually. I mean, the only ones I have actually, I only ever got Game Pro and I think it was like the official U.S. PlayStation magazine, the one that came with the demo discs.
Yep, I used to get that one every month.
Me too.
And
But
boy, am I glad I did. That's what introduced me to God of War.
but no, I mean, all in all, there was surprisingly a lot more to this game than I realized. Going into it, not playing the game, only knowing really not a whole lot at all. I was actually genuinely enthralled in reading a lot about this because it kind of went on it was kind of a neat little journey that the game went from, that they decided to bring a second iteration in the series first and foremost over to the US, and then the process of actually porting it over and not just directly, all right, word for word, boom, translate the script and we're going in. It was more, they gave the guy the ability to make whatever he wanted with it, and it all in all, it made the game as successful as it became. I think I'd be curious to see if it was a direct port and directly just translated. I don't think it nearly would have gotten as rave of reviews as it did.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a good thing that Super Smash Bros. Did so well. Otherwise, I wonder what made them choose Ness as a character in Super Smash Bros. Like, I'm legitimately curious as to why they decided to use Ness, a character from a game that wasn't received all that well here in the States, to then put him in the game. Was it a ploy? Was it a means of getting more attention on Earthbound?
I mean, it could have been actually. Well, see, the thing is though, I mean, obviously Super Smash Brothers came out in 2009, but one thing I did sort of forget to mention as well, but Earthbound actually came out in 2013 as well on the Virtual Console.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, from playing Super Smash Brothers, it might not be a bad, I think you got additional people who might have seen it, because I don't know if Ness was in the other Super Smash Brothers games as well. I can't really remember. But
I believe he was in a few.
I mean, he's kind of that one character that really sticks out as a who the hell is this?
Yeah.
And from them releasing it on Virtual Console and so forth, I think that could actually bring more interest to the game. Personally, I mean, like I said, honestly, from reading this, granted I don't have any Nintendo consoles currently, but I'm kind of interested in checking it out, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, I pulled a few pictures to put on the loop here for our folks watching live or anybody who checks out the video version, and the game looks pretty good. I mean, I don't know if these screen caps that I found were from the Virtual Console release. The fidelity of the graphics kind of makes it seem as such, but the only thing they do is they change textures and stuff like that. They only change the layout of the land, and it looks really, really interesting.
I mean, the thing is, though, back then, a lot of the games really looked a lot sharper than, being your more 8-bit and 16-bit games. They looked oddly sharper than, I'll say, your earlier, like, PS3 and so forth games, because with having the flat surface to work on, even though it is sort of 2D somewhat 3D, you can make you can make everything look super smooth and super clean. And I was actually surprised, kind of with you, looking at some of the screenshots. It's kind of a pretty game in a way.
Yeah, it looks good.
It.
So maybe I'll check it out sometime.
If I get a Nintendo something or other, I might look into it. But I think that's gonna do it for this week.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I've got nothing else to add, unfortunately. No personal experience to go on, so.
Yeah, kind of same here. But thanks to everybody for tuning in live, listening on Podbean or iTunes. Make sure to give us a review and feel free to send any feedback to us at GameCastContinuum@gmail.com. And just thanks again for tuning in. And we'll see you next week for another exciting episode of GameCast Continuum.
Have a good one, guys. Thanks for watching or listening.